Dear parents, I'm sure you'll understand the last few years have been wild since medicine invented the transgender child. This has influenced us all in so many ways, so I'm sending this message to you all today. We're teaching your child to think queer, not straight, that sex is provisional and genders innate. It's groundbreaking. It's terrific. It's not scientific, but so what? Who cares? The truth is for squares. Let's break the gender binary and smash the cotton ceiling. What makes your child a girl is her internal feeling. Now, if your kid decides to be trans, then that's great. Sex is provisional, gender's innate. In queer theory, it's different. It needs to be stated. In queer theory, gender identity's created. And it's queer theory that we're rolling out to our schools. So get with the program. We're transgressing the rules. This is not a case of us merely playing tricks. No, we're smashing the cis heteronormative matrix. Kids can, if they wish, choose to change gender. There'll be no questions asked. We don't want to offend. And these kids can, if they wish, for the good of their health, specify the words to refer to themselves. Now, we've put our trust in Stonewall, and Stonewall state that sex is provisional and gender's innate. Put your trust in your school and all will be fine. We're encouraging your kids to spend more time online. They need to discover, for the good of their health, the person who is their authentic self.
I started, getting involved in online groups that were very pro social justice, very woke, and very into gender ideology, like the gender is a spectrum, like very new agey gender stuff.
Mm-hmm. Were these like Facebook groups or on other kinds of platforms?
Tumblr mainly.
Tumblr.
Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know a lot about Tumblr, it's not as popular now, but back in the day, like 2012, 2013, all the way up to like 2016 or 17, it was pretty popular. It's a micro blogging platform, which just means it's kind of like Twitter, but with more space for text. Like people will write longer posts, and it's also more image based. So people will share like art and edits of photos that they do, like photography, all sorts of stuff. But mainly most people use it to talk about their interests. So like different fandoms, different TV shows, different celebrities that they're interested in. And you get these groups, I guess, that are centered around an interest. But the thing is that no matter what interest you're in, really on Tumblr, anywhere you are in the Tumblr space, it's very, very pro social justice and super duper woke. So yeah, I started getting involved in those communities and just gradually, it was a complicated process and we can get more into like how this happened for a teenage girl. But yeah, I just ended up after the course of a few years identifying as trans. And as soon as I turned 18, I went on testosterone and I was on testosterone for about 17 months.
Right. So what was the response like from the Tumblr community when you came out as someone who identified as trans? And then what has the response been since you've decided that you're detransitioning?
Yeah, so when I first decided that I would come out as trans, it was a gradual process. So I didn't just come out one day and say I'm a boy. I started with like, I'm a demi girl. My pronouns are they, them, like that kind of thing. And then I just progressively got more and more towards like wanting to be a boy. But yeah, every step along the way, every time I would change my pronouns or change my name or something like that, all on Tumblr, people would be very supportive and like send me messages being like, oh, I support you so much. This is amazing that you're doing this and like being yourself and finding yourself. So there was a lot of support there. And I also, a big thing on Tumblr is like most people who've been on Twitter will also recognize this, but it's like when you're talking about an issue, if you're like a straight white person, they will tell you that you're not allowed to have an opinion on that issue.
Yes.
And so that, like, as a teenager, I always felt very self-conscious about that I wouldn't be able to speak my mind on anything. I like to speak my mind. Like, I'm a pretty like opinionated person. But yeah, I would always get that response that I can't say what I want to say because I'm a straight white girl.
Mm-hmm.
But after I came out as trans, that kind of went away, and I now had some credibility and ability to speak on different issues.
Yes.
So that was, aside from the support, it really felt like I could speak my mind better.
A school may decide to change your child's name. You've no right to be told. We don't want the child shamed. Social transitioning, I must impress, has been shown to improve a child's happiness. To make kids' transgender identity stable, you can rely on Jeremy to give them a label. Of course, there's no objective test, but this isn't a quiz. We accept whatever the child says she, he is. And blockers are vital, you must agree, to avoid a child going through the wrong puberty.
Non-timely intervention for trans young people can be a lifelong tragedy. And I just wanted to say that, yes, the vast majority just need socialization and support and talk. But at Tanner stage 2, there is a very limited window of opportunity to prevent long-term damage from inappropriate puberty. And that's where puberty blockers are essential. And those puberty blockers really need to be prescribed at the onset of Tanner stage 2. For those of you that don't know in detail what the Tanner stages are, Tanner stage 2 is the first visible signs of puberty.
Trans boys are boys, trans girls are girls. Kids can break free of the material world. Don't worry about their body and their future health. Why challenge stereotypes when you can just change yourself?
That's supporting us for who we want to become regardless of our gender.
And if it may seem to defy natural logic that a boy has a fanny and a girl has a dick, if it may seem that this doesn't make sense, please defer to gendered intelligence. Fuck rolling, stuff stock. A girl can have a cock. This is the new world, and let's face it, those who express concerns are like racists. We're committed to a conversion therapy ban, though we can't define conversion, and we can't define trans.
Today, I want to further reaffirm and offer reassurance that the Welsh Government is committed to banning conversion practices for everyone in our LGBTQ+ communities. We will do everything possible within our devolved powers and seek the devolution of any necessary additional powers to achieve this. The Welsh Government will protect and value every LGBTQ+ person. Action speaks louder than words, and it is clear we cannot trust the UK Government to deliver the protections that every member of the LGBTQ+ community deserves. Today, I can announce the next steps this Welsh Government is taking and will take towards making conversion therapy a thing of the past. By the commission of legal advice to determine all the levers we have in Wales to end the practice of conversion therapy unilaterally. I want to know what we can do, not just what we can't do.
We've signed the memorandum to affirm without question. Don't you know it's transphobic to make the suggestion that perhaps trans is trendy, a bit like a cult. We know children are suggestible, they're not yet adult, but a child's gender identity is their human right. It's transphobic to question it. And those who might are practicing conversion. They're beyond the pale. The right to avoid puberty must always prevail.
But it was pretty clear to me that there was an agenda behind the memorandum. And what that agenda was actually was coming from people who are coming from a very different place from those of us who might have worked clinically and medically. It was coming from people who had more of a political and ideological interest in gender identity and not necessarily in medical transition at all. In fact, most of the people I've observed who seem to be most active in that element of the memorandum are not in any way connected to medical transition. So that wasn't on their minds. I think what was on their minds was that they believed that there were these huge cohorts of young people who really were trans, whatever that is, because that's not something that's ever really established what it is. I mean, I can tell you from working in a clinic that people come and ask for treatment for lots of different reasons. There isn't one kind of intrinsic trans person, there are just individuals with different feelings about themselves, trying to make sense of themselves. So I think the people who were angling for this memorandum had an ideological and political motivation to try to, they're kind of iconoclasts. They want to have a kind of gender revolution where you completely break down any kind of binary gender roles. I mean, they talk about gender identity, but I see it more in terms of roles, the gender roles that people have, how men are meant to be and how women are meant to be, and the kind of collective assumptions and history of all that. It's quite complex and deep. So I think they wanted to make it that, you couldn't argue with someone who said, well, I'm this other gender identity, or I'm that, or I'm non-binary. They wanted to educate these, ignorant therapists that there are all these other ways of being out there and all these different gender identities, and you're going to have to agree with that. But what they haven't realized that actually this is going to affect people medically, and that thousands and thousands of people are transitioning and then saying they regretted and detransitioning, and there is the evidence out there that is the case.
Get with the programme. March on parade. Proclaim your fealty to the gender crusade. This is the new world where iconoclasts, we need to break free from our colonial past.
About us all being able to understand the expansive way that we need to think about gender. It doesn't belong to anybody in particular. It doesn't need to be in a binary, which is inherent from history and colonialism. It's a more expansive, free-thinking idea that we need to put into our understanding of psychology, into our understanding of therapy, in order that we can explore with clients, with young people, their freedom to be able to be who they wish to be.
Let's see the world through a new gender prism. And let's all get on board with a new catechism. Although Jesus, it is claimed, made wine from water, he never quite managed to turn sons into daughters. Sing hallelujah, exclaim the gloria. Let's alleviate gender dysphoria. Now, there has been a huge increase in the number of kids who transitioned late and were referred to GIDS. But this is simply a result of improved information and nothing to do with social contagion. And there is a huge overrepresentation of those children who are on the autistic spectrum. You can argue that this cohort can easily take some teaching way too literally. That report is by a group with nefarious plans to spread a message that is anti-trans. We're sure there's a biological reason we can find for the body to be incongruent with the autistic mind.
Gender identity is an internal sense of oneself as being a boy, man, girl, woman, or something else. While gender roles can be informed by the social world, evidence suggests that gender identity is rooted in neurobiology, in a part of the developing forebrain also influenced by sex hormones, but at a different point in time to the development of the genitalia. Being separated in time offers the potential for sex and gender identity to be influenced independently.
The Welsh Gender Service don't track numbers of autistics. We don't think it necessary to collate such statistics. And there are many more children who would turn out to be gay but say they are trans, and the gays transed away. A trans MTF may have some complications. An inability to orgasm, they need regular dilations. A trans FTM may likewise see premature menopause and vaginal atrophy. But it's a small price to pay for their dedication to a lifelong dependence on hormonal medication. Don't expect clinicians to ask challenging questions about the patient's gender journey. They won't make suggestions. Later expressions of regret will seem lame. Clinicians did what they were told. There's only the patient to blame.
Hello, my name is Sophie Quinney, and I'm one of the gender clinicians here at the Cardiff Clinic. My professional background is general practice, and I joined the movement to improve healthcare for trans and non-binary people in 2018. I use a gender affirmative approach and see my role as giving you the knowledge and support you need to progress your transition in a way that is best for you. This could cover the social elements of transition or things like hormone therapies and gender-affirming surgeries. I'll meet you where you're at and help you get to where you need to go in order to live happily and authentically. I look forward to meeting you, and in the meantime, take good care.
The service we provide is best practice. It's great. It's a model that England should emulate.
The Welsh model, the new Welsh Gender Service, it's completely different. It's rewritten the book on gender treatment. And the model we took wasn't anything to do with gender. It was to do with type 2 diabetes. When type 2 diabetes became so widespread that it was a problem that couldn't be handled by specialists, it was taken on by primary healthcare, by your GP. And nobody expects to be referred to a specialist now just because they've developed type 2 diabetes. Your GP will deal with it locally. So in Wales, the system is very simple. We have some additional training, which is being offered to any GP that's interested. And that additional training qualifies them to be the lead on gender identity within their GP cluster. So I think we've got 70 clusters in Wales, something of that order, and each of them has got at least one specially trained GP. So your GP, who may not have the knowledge, only sends you to that cluster GP, who is going to be someone in your town, your locality, somebody very close with that extra training. That GP has got access to the gender centres. We've got one in Cardiff at the moment, but we're planning another 3. And that gender centre is there for 2 reasons. Firstly, to provide expertise to that cluster GP. And secondly, to provide a place for that GP to refer more complex cases.
Now, the interim CAS report found that GIDS were receiving more complex cases. There were more female and neurodiverse kids among the traditional faces. There was enormous pressure on clinicians to adopt an unquestioning affirmative approach that sits at odds with the questioning mode that helps the clinician diagnose. The review also commented on the many minds whose ideas are very selective and will interpret raw data in an uncritical way from a particular ideological perspective. Although you may think that these comments make sense, we have a broader set of evidence.
So the Welsh Health Specialist Services Committee, which is responsible for the service in Wales, met with Dr Cass in March. As a result, we have a commitment that the review team will work with the Welsh service and providers here so that we can further define the clinical service model for the future that would be needed in Wales and any identified workforce implications. WISC intend to ask for expressions of interests from those in the field for a gender identity development service for Wales, and that will be informed by the Cass review, by the conversations that we will have with Dr Cass, but also by a broader set of evidence that we have here in Wales of the needs of young people in these circumstances, which will allow us not simply to pick up a set of solutions devised for a different jurisdiction, but to develop those services in a way that are sensitive to the landscape of service and the needs of young people here in Wales.
I know there's been some problems in GIDS, but we believe it's right to affirm our young kids.
So we've adopted some of the things that we think are done really well. So, for example, because we now have our own service, we don't require people to go through the mental health teams. If they're aged 17 and a half and over, they can be referred directly now to the Welsh service by their GP. So that's a huge relief to have that put in place.
Believing in this new world is a blast. We're using taxpayers' money to rewrite the past. Don't be tempted to question a kid's education. We're aiming to make Wales Europe's queerest nation. And we're creating a new Welsh equivalent to GIDS to cater for the results of us queering your kids. We don't listen to critics. We've no time for knockers. If your child asks, then just put them on blockers. We know what we're doing, and everyone agrees. We've put our trust in a panel of vast expertise.
The concerns that I had came in my role as a staff governor of the Tavistock, so I was a representative of the clinical and academic staff. The concerns that were brought to me were very, very serious. The main concerns were issues to do with lack of consent. That many of the people who spoke to me did not think the children were able to consent to the treatment. Then there were concerns of children being inappropriately pushed through to transition, whereas they had a lot of complex problems that really needed thinking about. The whole attitude of what's called affirmation instead of neutrality and inquiry caused considerable damage to the capacity of the service and clinicians to take on the full complexities of the cases they were dealing with. As a result, children have been very seriously damaged. 35 to 40% of these children are on the autistic spectrum. Large number of them have been exposed to major trauma. Large number have very serious family problems. And a particularly large number of them, young girls, who, if left alone, could be helped to become non-gender conforming lesbian women. So the repositioning of these girls as having a gender problem, it acts to prevent them developing in a normal way and being able to develop their own, if you like, non-conforming gender identity and their own sexuality. This is a form of conversion therapy for young people who are gay or lesbian.